Ryan Montgomery did not even stand up when his wife walked through the door. He lifted the wine bottle she had been saving for 15 years, the one meant for their anniversary, and he poured it into the glass of the woman curled against his chest. Then he looked at Grace, the woman he had been married to for 5 years, and he smiled the way a man smiles at a stranger who has wandered into the wrong house. "You're home early," he said. "You should have called. Victoria and I were just getting comfortable." And the worst part, the part that would haunt every person who heard this story, was that he meant for her to feel small. He wanted her to break right there on the floor of the mansion he paid for. He had no idea what he had just done. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. If you believe a person's worth is measured by their character and not by their bank account, then take 1 second right now to subscribe to this channel and stay with me until the very end, because this story turns in ways you will not see coming. And do me a small favor. Leave a comment and tell me the name of the city where you are watching from right now so I can see just how far this story has traveled. Now let me tell you what really happened that night. The blanket Victoria Hayes had wrapped around her shoulders was not just any blanket. Grace recognized it the moment she stepped into the living room. It was the one her mother had stitched by hand in the final months of her life, sitting up in a hospital bed with thread and needle because she wanted to leave her daughter something warm to hold when she was gone. Grace had carried that blanket through every move, every hard year, every cold apartment, and now it was draped over the shoulders of the woman her husband had brought into their home. That was the first thing Grace saw. Not the wine, not the woman, the blanket. And something inside her went very, very quiet. "Grace," Victoria said, and there was laughter hiding behind her voice. "We didn't hear you come in." She did not move. She did not pull the blanket away or sit up straight or do any of the things a person does when they have been caught. Instead, she settled deeper into the couch, deeper into the space that belonged to Grace, and she sipped the wine like she had every right to it. Grace did not answer her. She looked at Ryan. "How long?" she said. It was not even a question. It came out flat, almost gentle, the way you might ask about the weather. Ryan shrugged. He actually shrugged. "Does it matter?" he said. "You've been so busy with your little charity projects, running around with checkbooks I gave you, smiling for cameras, pretending you matter. A man gets lonely, Grace." "How long?" she said again. "Long enough," he said. And then he laughed. "You really want to do this now? You want to stand there in your wet coat and make a scene? Go ahead. Cry. Throw something. It won't change anything." He leaned back and put his arm around Victoria. "This is my house, my money, my life. You're a guest here, sweetheart. You always have been. You just forgot." There was a long pause then, and the rain was loud against the windows, and Grace did the one thing nobody in that room expected. She did not cry. She did not scream. She took a slow breath, and she nodded like a woman who had finally received the answer to a question she had been carrying for a very long time. "You're right about one thing," she said quietly. "I did forget. I forgot what I let you turn me into." "Oh, here we go," Ryan said, rolling his eyes toward Victoria. "The speech. Every woman has one. Let's hear it." But there was no speech. Grace reached up and slid the wedding ring off her finger. It came off easily, far too easily, as if it had been waiting years to leave. She set it on the table by the door, the marble table he had bought to impress his investors, and the small clink of metal on stone was somehow louder than all of his words. "What are you doing?" Ryan said, and for the first time something flickered across his face. Not fear, not yet, just the smallest crack of confusion. "I'm leaving," Grace said. He laughed again, but it was thinner this time. "And where exactly are you going to go? You don't have a car that isn't in my name. You don't have a credit card I didn't give you. You don't have a single dollar that didn't come out of my pocket. You were a waitress, Grace, a cafe waitress with a sad story and a dead mother. I lifted you up out of nothing, and the second you walk out that door, you go right back to it." Grace stopped at the threshold. She turned and she looked at him for a long moment, and what frightened Ryan, what he would think about for the rest of his life, was that there was no hatred in her eyes. There was only a kind of pity. "You really believe that?" she said. "After 5 years, you really believe that's who I am?" "I know who you are," he snapped. "No," she said softly. "You don't. You never once asked. And that's going to cost you more than you can possibly imagine." Then she picked up one small bag, the same bag she had brought into the marriage packed in under 3 minutes, with nothing but a few clothes and her mother's blanket, which she gently lifted from Victoria's shoulders without a word, and she walked out into the storm. Ryan stood in the doorway and watched her go. The rain swallowed her almost immediately. He told himself she would be back by morning, by tomorrow night at the latest. Where could she possibly go? He turned back inside, refilled his glass, and put the whole thing out of his mind. He had a company to run. He had investors flying in from Tokyo. He had a life and empire, a name that opened every door in the city. And Grace had a wet coat and a duffel bag. "She'll come crawling back," he told Victoria. "They always do." Victoria smiled and said nothing, because Victoria had learned a long time ago that men like Ryan only liked agreement. But here is what Ryan Montgomery did not know. Here is the truth that had been sitting in his own house for 5 years, sleeping beside him, eating breakfast across from him, smiling at his cruel jokes and absorbing his casual insults. The woman he had just thrown into the rain was not a cafe waitress. She had never been a cafe waitress, not in the way he meant it. She had worked in that cafe, yes, but she had done it the way some people climb mountains by choice out of love, with her eyes wide open. And the story of why she did it was about to come apart in his hands like wet paper. Grace walked 4 blocks in the rain before she stopped under the awning of a closed bookstore and pulled out a phone. He had never seen a simple phone with one number saved in it. She dialed, and a man's voice answered on the second ring. "Miss Carter," the voice said. "We've been waiting a long time for this call." "It's time, Daniel," Grace said. "Start everything." "Are you certain?" the voice asked. "Once we begin, there's no quiet way to walk it back." Grace looked out in the rain at the city lights smearing across the wet pavement, and for the first time in 5 years, she felt the weight come off her chest. "I've been certain for 2 years," she said. "I was just waiting for a reason to stop pretending. He gave it to me tonight." And on the other end of that line, in an office 40 floors above the city, a team of people Ryan Montgomery had never heard of began to move. Let me take you back, because to understand what Grace was about to do, you have to understand who she really was, and you have to understand it the way Ryan never bothered to. Grace Carter was born in a small town in Ohio, to a mother who cleaned houses and a father who left before Grace could walk. Her mother, Eleanor, was the smartest person Grace ever knew, a woman who read library books at the kitchen table until midnight, and who told her daughter every single day that the mind was the one thing in this world no one could ever take from you. "They can take the house," Eleanor used to say. "They can take the car, the money, the name. But what you know, baby, what you build up here, that's yours forever." Grace believed her. Grace took it to heart in a way that changed the shape of her entire life. She was the kind of child who took apart radios just to see how they worked and then put them back together better than before. By the time she was 16, she was correcting her physics teacher gently because she had never learned how to be cruel. By the time she was 18, she had a full scholarship to Stanford, and her mother cried for 3 days, partly out of pride and partly because she knew the distance was going to be hard. At Stanford, Grace did not just succeed. She left her professors speechless. She earned a degree in aerospace engineering, and then, because one was not enough for the questions she wanted to answer, she earned advanced degrees in propulsion systems and materials science. There were companies lining up to hire her before she had even graduated. There were research labs offering her her own team at an age when most engineers are still fetching coffee. And then in her final year, her mother got sick. It was the kind of sick that does not get better, the kind that comes with a name doctors say quietly and bills that arrive in thick envelopes. And Grace, who could have taken any of those jobs, who could have flown anywhere in the world and built rockets and made a fortune, did something that no one around her understood. She went home. She turned down every offer. She moved back to be near her mother, and because the medical bills were swallowing everything, she took ordinary jobs. She worked at a cafe, she worked nights, she did whatever paid, and she did it without complaint, because she had made a decision that the most brilliant mind in the room is worth nothing if it abandons the people it loves. "Anyone can build an engine," she told a friend once. "Not everyone shows up." For 3 years she did this. She held her mother's hand through treatment after treatment. She read to her at night from the same library books they had loved when Grace was small. And when Eleanor finally passed, she passed in a clean, warm room with her daughter beside her, holding a hand-stitched blanket, knowing she was loved. That to Grace had been worth more than any career. She never once called it a sacrifice. She called it a privilege. It was during those cafe years that she met Ryan Montgomery. He came in for coffee, a young investor with big plans and bigger confidence, and he saw a pretty waitress with sad eyes and decided she was a project. He liked the idea of lifting someone up. He liked the way it made him feel. He courted her, and Grace, exhausted and grieving and lonelier than she had ever been in her life, let herself fall for the warmth of a man who seemed to want to take care of her. She did not tell him about Stanford. She did not tell him about the degrees, the offers, the brilliant career she had walked away from. At first she did not tell him because it did not matter to her, because she had genuinely set it aside. And later she did not tell him because she began to understand something painful about the man she had married. Ryan did not want a partner. He wanted someone to rescue. He needed her to be beneath him. It was the only way he knew how to love. So she let him believe the story he wanted to believe. She let him believe she was nothing without him. And every time he reminded her of it, every time he made a joke about the cafe at a dinner party, every time he introduced her as the girl, he found something in her quietly hardened into a decision she had not yet made out loud. But here is the part that would have shattered Ryan if he had ever bothered to learn it. The part his private investigators would soon dig up and lay across his desk like a bomb. Grace Carter was not poor. She had not been poor for years. Her mother's father, a man Grace had barely known growing up because of an old family rift, had been one of the most respected technology investors in America, a quiet legend, the kind of man whose name appeared in the fine print of half the breakthroughs of his generation. He and Eleanor had not spoken in decades, a wound that never healed. But when he died just 1 year before Eleanor herself fell ill, his will revealed a secret he had carried in silence. He had been watching his granddaughter from a distance the entire time. He had read about the Stanford scholarship. He had quietly tracked her work, and he had left nearly $600 million to a granddaughter he had never had the courage to call. Grace had inherited a fortune, and she had never touched a single dollar of it while she was married to Ryan. Think about that. Let that sit for a moment. The woman Ryan mocked for spending his money, the woman he called a guest in his own house, the woman he swore would have nothing without him, had more money sitting untouched in accounts than he had built in 30 years. She could have walked away on the very first night he insulted her. She could have bought his company out from under him while he slept. But she did not. And the reason why is the most important thing in this entire story. She stayed because she loved him, not because she needed him, not because she had nowhere to go. She had everywhere to go. She had the whole world at her feet and a vault full of reasons to leave, and still she stayed, hoping year after year that someday the man she married would look across the table and finally see her, really see her. She kept the money hidden, not out of fear, but out of a desperate, fading hope that Ryan loved the woman he thought was poor, and that if she ever revealed the truth, she would never know whether he loved her or her fortune. So she waited. She managed his charities. She smiled at his investors. She absorbed his cruelty, and she told herself that under all of it, there was still a man worth waiting for. She was in her own quiet way conducting the longest and most painful experiment of her life, and every year the answer came back a little colder. What Ryan did that stormy night was not the beginning of the end. It was the end of the waiting. When he poured her anniversary wine into another woman's glass and wrapped her mother's blanket around his mistress and laughed at her for being nothing, he did not break Grace Carter. He freed her. He gave her permission to stop hoping. And a woman with $600 million, 2 advanced engineering degrees, a mind that left the best in the world, speechless, and absolutely nothing left to lose, is the most dangerous person you will ever underestimate. That night, under the awning of a closed bookstore, when she told Daniel to start everything, she was not making a threat. She was not plotting revenge. Revenge was too small a word for what was coming, and it was not even what she wanted. The plans had existed for 2 years, the patents were filed, the technology was nearly ready, the company was waiting for her. She had been holding it all back, keeping it dim the way you might cup your hand around a flame to protect it from the wind. Ryan had just blown the wind away. Now the flame was free to become a fire. Daniel had asked her if she was certain. He had asked because he knew what came next. He knew that the moment Grace Carter stepped into the light, the entire technology industry was going to feel the ground shift, and a man named Ryan Montgomery was going to wake up one morning and discover that the wife he threw into the rain had been the most extraordinary person he would ever meet, and that he had spent 5 years too proud and too blind to notice. But that was still to come. On this night, Ryan knew none of it. He sat in his warm mansion with his wine and his mistress and his certainty, and he checked his phone for a text from Grace that was never going to come. He told himself again that she would be back. He almost believed it. Across the city, soaked to the skin, and holding the only thing in the world she truly cared about, Grace, hailed a cab and gave the driver an address Ryan had never heard of. As the car pulled away from the curb, she did not look back at the life she was leaving. She looked forward. And for the first time in 5 years, Grace Carter was not waiting to be chosen. She had finally completely chosen herself. The cab driver, an older man with kind eyes, glanced at her in the mirror. "Rough night, miss?" he asked. Grace looked out the window at the rain, and something that was almost a smile touched her face. "No," she said quietly. "Best night I've had in years. I just didn't know it until now." The driver chuckled. "Sounds like you're starting over." "No," Grace said. "I'm starting on time." And somewhere in a glass office 40 floors above the sleeping city, a team of brilliant people Ryan Montgomery had never heard of switched on their screens, opened the files they had been guarding for 2 years, and got to work on a future that was about to make the whole world say one name over and over again: Grace Carter. 3 days passed and Grace did not come back. Ryan told himself it meant nothing. He sat at the head of the long table in his office, surrounded by men who flinched when he raised his voice, and he checked his phone for the 4th time in 10 minutes. Nothing. No call, no text, no tearful voicemail begging to come home. He set the phone face down and told himself she was just being dramatic, that she was sleeping on some friend's couch, eating ramen, learning her lesson. "She'll break by the weekend," he said out loud to no one. His assistant, a young woman named Priya, who had worked for him for 2 years and had never once seen Grace raise her voice, looked up from her notepad. "Sir." "Nothing," Ryan snapped. "Get me the Tokyo numbers." But by the 5th day, the silence had begun to do something to him. It crawled under his skin. He had expected anger from her, and he knew how to handle anger. He had expected tears, and tears he could ignore. What he had not expected was nothing. The complete, absolute absence of Grace. It was as if she had not just left the house, but stepped off the edge of the world. On the 7th day, he called her phone. It rang once and went dead. He called again. This time, a recorded voice told him the number was no longer in service. Ryan sat very still for a long moment. Then he picked up the phone again and dialed a number he had not used in years. "Marcus," he said when the line connected. "It's Ryan Montgomery. I need you to find someone. My wife." Marcus Doyle was the best private investigator money could buy, the kind of man who found people who did not want to be found. "Standard package?" Marcus asked. "Last known address, financials, the works." "Everything," Ryan said. "I want to know where she's sleeping. I want to know who she's talking to, and I want it fast." "Give me 48 hours, Marcus said. It took him 12. Ryan was eating dinner alone, Victoria having gone shopping with a card he had stopped enjoying, paying for when his phone buzzed with a call from Marcus. He picked it up, smiling, expecting an address, expecting the satisfaction of knowing exactly how far Grace had fallen. "Tell me she's in a motel," Ryan said. There was a pause on the line, a long one. "Mr. Montgomery," Marcus said slowly, "I need you to sit down." Ryan laughed. "I'm sitting. What is it? Did she go back to Ohio? Is she waitressing again? God, that's almost poetic." "Sir," Marcus said, and there was something in his voice Ryan had never heard from him before. It was caution, almost fear. "How much do you actually know about your wife?" The smile left Ryan's face. "What kind of question is that? I know everything about her. I married her. Cafe waitress, dead mother, no family, no money. I lifted her out of nothing. Why?" "Because almost none of that is true," Marcus said. The fork in Ryan's hand went still. "Your wife," Marcus continued, "Grace Carter. She graduated from Stanford, top of her class. Aerospace engineering and then 2 graduate degrees on top of it. Propulsion systems, material science. Mr. Montgomery, your wife is one of the most credentialed engineers I have ever run a background check on. There were companies trying to recruit her before she even finished school." Ryan did not speak. He could not. "It gets stranger," Marcus said. "She turned them all down. Every single one. Walked away from the whole thing right before graduation. The records show her mother got sick around that time. Terminal. Grace went home to take care of her. That's when she took the cafe job. She wasn't a waitress because she had no other options, sir. She was a waitress because she chose to be one. She gave up an entire career to sit at her mother's bedside. Ryan's mouth had gone dry. He thought of every dinner party, every joke he had made about the girl he found pouring coffee, every time he had introduced her as someone he had rescued. He thought of the way she had smiled through all of it and said nothing. "There's more," Marcus said, "and this is the part I really need you to sit down for." "I'm sitting," Ryan whispered. "Your wife is rich, Mr. Montgomery. And I don't mean comfortable. I don't mean she's got a savings account. Her grandfather was Arthur Whitman." The name hit Ryan like a fist. Arthur Whitman. Every person in the technology world knew that name. A legend. A quiet titan whose investments had built half the industry. A man whose endorsement could make a company and whose silence could break one. "That's impossible," Ryan said. "Whitman didn't have any grandchildren. It was public. His estate. His estate went to a granddaughter almost no one knew existed," Marcus said. "There was a family rift decades old. He and his daughter never spoke, but he kept track of the granddaughter from a distance. When he died, he left her nearly $600 million. Ryan stood up so fast his chair fell over behind him. $600 million, Marcus repeated. "And here's the thing that's going to keep you up tonight, sir. She inherited it before she met you. She had that money the entire time she was married to you. And as far as I can tell from her financials, she never touched a dollar of it. Not one. She lived on your money. She let you believe she had nothing, while she was sitting on a fortune larger than yours." The phone slipped slightly in Ryan's hand. He pressed it harder to his ear. "Why?" he heard himself say. "Why would she do that? Why would she hide it? Why would she stay and let me—" He stopped. He could not finish the sentence because finishing it meant saying out loud all the things he had done to her. "That's not my department," Marcus said quietly. "But if you want my read on it, Mr. Montgomery, having done this job for 20 years, a woman doesn't hide that kind of money to trick you. She hides it because she wants to know if you love her without it. She was testing you. And from where I'm standing, looking at the timeline of when she walked out, I'd say she finally got her answer." The line went silent. Ryan stood in his enormous dining room surrounded by everything his money had bought, and for the first time in his adult life, he felt small. "Find her," he said. His voice cracked. "Marcus, just find her. I have to talk to her. I have to—" "That's the other problem," Marcus said. "I can't." "What do you mean you can't? You found all this in 12 hours. "I found her history in 12 hours, Marcus said. "Finding her right now is a different thing. Somebody's protecting her, and I mean serious protection. New phone, new accounts, a legal wall around her movements that I've only ever seen around people who can afford a small army of attorneys. Wherever your wife went, Mr. Montgomery, she didn't stumble there. She planned it. This wasn't a woman running away in the rain. This was a woman executing a plan she'd had ready for a long time." Ryan hung up without saying goodbye. He stood there for a long time. Then he did something he had not done in years. He walked through the house slowly, room by room, looking at it the way you look at a place you are about to lose. And everywhere he looked, he saw her. Not the woman he had insulted. The woman he had never bothered to know. He saw the bookshelf in the study packed with engineering texts he had assumed were decorative. He saw the small desk in the corner of the guest room where she sometimes worked late at night and which he had never once asked about. He saw the notebooks. He pulled one open and found it filled page after page with equations and diagrams and the quick, confident handwriting of someone who understood things he could not begin to follow. She had been doing this the entire time, right under his roof, while he laughed at her. Victoria came home around 11, arms full of shopping bags, and found him sitting in the dark. "What's wrong with you?" she said, flipping on the lights. "You look like someone died." Ryan looked up at her, and something cold settled into his chest. He looked at this woman draped in things he had paid for, this woman who agreed with everything he said, who laughed at his jokes and never challenged him and never ever surprised him. And he understood with terrible clarity that he had thrown away something rare and real for something cheap and easy. "Get out," he said quietly. Victoria blinked. "What?" "You heard me. Get your bags. Get out of my house." "You're upset," Victoria said, setting the bags down carefully. "Let me—" "I said get out," Ryan roared, and Victoria flinched, and for once she did not smile and she did not argue. She gathered her things in tight, furious silence and she left, and the door slammed behind her, and Ryan was alone in a mansion that suddenly felt like a museum to his own blindness. The next morning he went to work and tried to bury it all in numbers. It almost worked. For 3 weeks, it almost worked. He told himself Grace was a closed chapter, that knowing the truth changed nothing, that a man with his name and his company did not need to chase after a woman who had lied to him for 5 years. He almost believed it. He even started to feel something like anger again, which was more comfortable than the shame. She had deceived him. She had made a fool of him. He could live with being the villain, but he could not live with being the fool. And then on a Tuesday morning, his entire world tilted on its axis. It started with a buzz. His phone, his assistant's phone, then every phone in the building all going off at once. Priya knocked on his door without waiting for an answer, her face pale. "Mr. Montgomery, you need to see this." "See what?" She turned the television on the wall to a business news channel, and there filling the screen was a headline that made Ryan's blood run cold. "Aerospace breakthrough stuns industry. Revolutionary clean propulsion system unveiled. Lead inventor revealed." And then they cut to a press conference, a room full of reporters, a stage, and standing at the podium, calm and radiant and completely in command, wearing a simple dark suit and absolutely no jewelry at all, was Grace. Ryan stopped breathing. She did not look nervous. She did not look like a woman who had fled into the rain 3 weeks ago with one bag. She looked like she had been born to stand exactly where she was standing. She spoke clearly without notes, explaining a system so advanced that the reporters in the room kept stopping to ask her to repeat herself, not because she was unclear, but because they could not keep up. "Dr. Carter," one reporter called out. "Industry experts are calling this the biggest breakthrough in propulsion in 30 years. How long have you been working on this?" Grace smiled, and it was a smile Ryan had seen 1,000 times across the breakfast table and never once understood. "Most of my life," she said. "I just hadn't been ready to share it until now." Dr. Carter. They were calling her Dr. Carter. Ryan sank into his chair. Priya was saying something to him, but he could not hear it over the roaring in his ears. On the screen, the woman he had thrown away, the woman he had called a guest in his own home, the woman he had told would have nothing without him, was being celebrated by the entire industry as a genius. The same engineers who would not return Ryan's calls were now lining up to praise her. "Get me out of this meeting," he said hoarsely. "Cancel everything. I need—" But before he could finish, his phone rang. It was Daniel Reyes, the head of his board. Ryan answered automatically. "Daniel, I can't right now." "Ryan," Daniel said, and his tone was strange. Careful. The tone people use when they are choosing their words because something has changed and they have not decided yet which side they are on. "We need to talk. The board needs to talk. Are you watching the news?" "I'm watching it," Ryan said. "Then you should know," Daniel said slowly, "that this woman, this Dr. Grace Carter, she's not just an inventor. We've been getting calls all morning, from shareholders, from analysts. Ryan, are you aware that someone has been quietly buying up shares in our company for the past several weeks, big blocks, through holding companies? We couldn't figure out who it was." Ryan's stomach dropped. "What are you telling me, Daniel?" "I'm telling you we figured out who it is," Daniel said. "It's her. It's your wife. Grace Carter has acquired a significant ownership stake in this company, significant enough that she now has a seat at the table whether we like it or not. Ryan, your ex-wife, is becoming one of the largest shareholders in your own company." The phone went silent. Ryan stared at the screen at Grace's calm and confident face, and he finally understood the thing Marcus had tried to warn him about. This was not a woman running away in the rain. This had never been about running away. Every step of this had been planned. The patents, the technology, the company, the shares. While he had been congratulating himself on getting rid of her, she had been quietly closing her hand around everything he owned. "Why is she doing this?" he whispered, and he was not even asking Daniel anymore. He was asking the room. He was asking himself. "She's not even angry. Look at her. She's not trying to hurt me. She's just—" He stopped, because that was the worst part. The thing that finally broke through every wall of pride and denial Ryan Montgomery had built around himself. Grace was not attacking him. She was not standing on that stage saying his name or settling scores or seeking revenge. She had not mentioned him once. She was simply calmly, effortlessly proving that everything he had believed about her was a lie. She was not trying to tear him down. She was just rising. And the rising alone was enough to expose how small he had always been. On the screen, a reporter asked Grace one final question. "Dr. Carter, there are rumors connecting you to Montgomery Technologies. Any comment on your relationship to the company or to its CEO?" The room went quiet. Even the reporters seemed to sense they were standing at the edge of a much larger story. Grace looked directly into the camera. And for just one moment, just a fraction of a second, Ryan would swear later that she was looking right at him through the screen across the city, into the office where he sat falling apart. "I have no comment on the past," she said simply. "I'm only interested in what we build next." Then she stepped away from the podium, and the press conference erupted, and the news anchors began breathlessly speculating. And somewhere deep in the building, Ryan heard his own board members already beginning to whisper. He sat alone in his office for the rest of the day. He did not take calls. He did not look at the Tokyo numbers. He watched the footage of Grace replay on the screen over and over again, and each time he saw something new. He saw the woman who had carried her mother's blanket out into the storm. He saw the woman whose notebooks filled an entire drawer. He saw the woman who had loved him enough to hide $600 million just to find out if he loved her back, and who had received her answer the night he threw that blanket at her feet and told her to kneel. By evening, his phone had stopped ringing. The silence in the office was the same silence that had been waiting for him in his empty house. And Ryan Montgomery, billionaire CEO, the man who had built an empire and believed himself untouchable, finally understood that the most dangerous thing he had ever done was look at an extraordinary woman every single day for 5 years and never once bother to see her. He picked up his phone, and knowing it would not connect, knowing the number was dead, knowing she was somewhere far beyond his reach, now he dialed Grace's old number anyway. It rang once, and then to his absolute shock, it did not go to a deadline. A man's voice answered, calm, professional, a voice Ryan had never heard. "Mr. Montgomery," the voice said, as though it had been expecting his call for weeks. "Dr. Carter thought you might reach out eventually. She left a message for you. Would you like to hear it?" Ryan's hand was shaking. "Who is this?" "Just listen," the voice said. Her words. "She said to tell you this. I waited 5 years for you to ask me a single question about who I really was. You never did, so I stopped waiting. That's all, Mr. Montgomery. That's the whole message." The line went dead. And Ryan Montgomery sat alone in the dark in the wreckage of everything he thought he knew, holding a phone that would never ring with her name again. The deadline was still buzzing in Ryan's ear when his office door opened without a knock. It was Daniel Reyes, and behind him were 2 other board members, and not one of them was smiling. Ryan knew that look. He had worn that look himself years ago, walking into rooms to deliver news that ended careers. "We need to talk now," Daniel said. "Not tomorrow, now." Ryan set the phone down slowly. "It's 9 at night, Daniel." "The shareholders don't care what time it is," Daniel said. "Half of them have been on the phone with me since that press conference. They want to know how the lead inventor of the biggest breakthrough in 30 years happens to be the ex-wife of our CEO. They want to know how she bought into this company without any of us noticing. And they want to know, Ryan, whether the man running this company is in control of anything at all." Ryan stood up. Old instinct. When attacked, attack back. "I built this company. I have run it for 15 years. One press conference does not change. It changes everything," cut in a sharp voice. It was Eleanor Pierce, the oldest member of the board, a woman who had sat on it longer than Ryan had been CEO, and who had never once raised her voice in all that time. She did not raise it now either. She did not have to. "Sit down, Ryan. You're embarrassing yourself, and frankly, you've embarrassed all of us. Do you have any idea what we look like right now? The genius was in your own house for 5 years, and you let her walk out the door because you were too busy with a woman half your age." Ryan's jaw tightened. "That's not—" "Don't," Eleanor said quietly. "Don't insult us by lying. We all know what happened. The whole industry knows by now. The only question left is what we do about it." There was a silence in the room, the kind that has weight, and Ryan felt the floor shifting under him. "What are you saying?" he said. Daniel exhaled. "There's going to be a vote of confidence. The board needs to decide whether you remain CEO." Ryan laughed, but it came out hollow. "You can't be serious. Over a propulsion system, over my ex-wife getting some press." "Over the fact," Eleanor said, "that she now controls enough of this company to call for that vote herself. And she has. The request came in 2 hours ago. Dr. Grace Carter has formally requested a board meeting to discuss the leadership and direction of Montgomery Technologies." Ryan sat back down. He did not decide to. His legs simply stopped holding him. "She wants the meeting in person," Daniel added. "Here, Friday." 3 days. Ryan had 3 days before the woman he had thrown into the rain walked into his own boardroom as one of its largest shareholders and decided in front of everyone whether he kept the empire he had spent his life building. That night, he did not sleep. He sat at the small desk in the guest room, Grace's desk, and he opened her notebooks one by one. He could not understand most of what was in them. The equations may as well have been a foreign language, but he could understand the dates. The earliest notebook went back 6 years, before they were married. She had been working on this propulsion system before she ever met him. She had carried it through their entire marriage, working at this little desk in the dark while he slept, and he had never once asked what she was doing. On one page, tucked between diagrams, he found something that was not an equation. It was a single line written in her quick handwriting, and it stopped his heart. He asked me today what I'd do all day. I told him nothing important. He believed me. I don't know if that breaks my heart or saves it. Ryan closed the notebook. He put his head in his hands, and for the first time since Grace had walked out, he wept. The next 2 days passed in a blur. Ryan called in every favor he had. He called the analysts. He called the engineers who had once worshipped him. He even, in a moment of desperation, tried to reach Victoria, thinking perhaps the public needed to see him moving on looking unbothered. Victoria did not answer. She had, he learned, already given an interview to a gossip site about the cold and controlling billionaire who had thrown her out. The story was everywhere by morning. It made him look exactly like what he was. By Thursday night, even his most loyal supporters had gone quiet. The whisper in the building had become a roar he could hear through the walls. Everyone knew. Everyone was waiting. And the man who had once walked into rooms and watched people straighten their backs, in fear now walked into rooms and watched people look away. Friday came. The boardroom on the 40th floor was full by 9 in the morning. Every seat taken. Every member present, plus a row of attorneys, plus a representative from the largest institutional shareholder. Ryan sat at the head of the table where he had sat for 15 years, and he had never felt so alone in that chair. At 9:15, the door opened. Grace walked in. She was not flanked by lawyers the way Ryan had imagined. She came in alone, carrying a single slim folder, wearing the same simple dark suit and no jewelry, and the room went absolutely silent. These were powerful people, people who did not impress easily, and yet every one of them sat up a little straighter when she entered. She had that quality now, the quality of someone who had stopped asking permission to exist. She did not look at Ryan first. She looked at the board. She nodded to Eleanor Pierce, who nodded back with something close to respect. "Thank you for seeing me," Grace said, and she took the empty seat at the far end of the table directly across from Ryan, the length of the long table between them. "I know this is unusual. I'll be brief." "Dr. Carter," Daniel began, "we're all aware of the situation, and I want to say on behalf of the board—" "You don't need to manage me, Mr. Reyes," Grace said gently. "I'm not here to make a scene. I'm here because I own a substantial part of this company, and I take that responsibility seriously. More seriously, I think, than it's been taken in some time." She opened her folder and slid identical copies down the table to each board member. Ryan reached for his with a hand he could not keep steady. "What you're looking at," Grace said, "is an independent analysis of this company's last 3 years, its declining R&D investment, its lost contracts, its talent leaving for competitors, its falling margins. I didn't commission this to embarrass anyone. I commissioned it because before I put my name and my money near a company, I do my homework. I always have." Eleanor Pierce was already turning pages, her eyebrows rising. "This company is dying," Grace said simply. "Slowly, but it's dying. Not because the technology is bad, because the leadership stopped building and started coasting. It stopped taking risks. It started protecting the comfort of the man at the top instead of the future of the people who work here." Every eye in the room turned to Ryan. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but Grace held up one hand, and remarkably he stopped. "I'm not finished," she said, "because I didn't come here to bury this company. I came here because I think it can be saved. The engineers are good, the bones are good, with the right propulsion technology, the right investment, and the right leadership. This could be one of the most important companies in the country within 5 years." A ripple went through the board. This they had not expected. "You'd license your technology to us?" Daniel asked, leaning forward. "Under the right conditions," Grace said. "I'd do more than that. I'd invest, heavily. I'd bring my team. I'd help rebuild this company from the inside out." She paused. But I won't do any of it under the current leadership. That's my condition. That's why I called this meeting. And there it was, the thing the entire room had been waiting for. Grace Carter had just made an offer to save the company, to make every person at that table richer than they had ever imagined, and the only price was Ryan Montgomery's chair. Ryan felt the world close in. "So this is revenge," he said, and his voice came out lower and rawer than he intended. "You came all this way to take everything from me, to do it in front of everyone." Grace looked at him for the first time since she had entered the room, and what was in her eyes was not triumph. It was not even anger. It was the same thing he had seen the night she left. It was that terrible, gentle pity. "You still think this is about you," she said quietly, "after everything. You still think I planned years of work, filed dozens of patents, built a company, and earned multiple degrees all, so that one day I could hurt your feelings in a boardroom." She shook her head slowly. "Ryan, none of this was ever about you. That's the part you can't accept. You were never the center of my world. You only thought you were because I let you believe it." The room was so quiet you could hear the building hum. "Then why the condition?" Eleanor Pierce asked, not unkindly. "If it isn't personal, Dr. Carter, why insist that Ryan step down?" Grace turned to her. "Because I'm a scientist," she said. "I follow the data, and the data on this man's leadership is in the folder in front of you. I'm not asking him to step down because he hurt me. I would never let something so small drive a decision this large. I'm asking him to step down because he is by every measurable standard the wrong person to lead this company into the future. The personal history makes it uncomfortable. It doesn't make it untrue. And that somehow was worse than any revenge could have been. Ryan would have understood hatred. He could have fought hatred. But Grace was not destroying him out of passion. She was setting him aside the way you set aside a tool that no longer works, with no anger and no joy, simply because it was the correct thing to do. The board went into discussion. Ryan was asked to wait outside. He stood in the hallway for 40 minutes, the longest 40 minutes of his life. Through the frosted glass, he could see shapes, moving hands, gesturing the slow machinery of a decision being made about his entire existence. And the strangest thing happened while he waited. He stopped thinking about the company. He stopped thinking about the chair, the title, the empire. He thought about a small desk in a dark room and a single line of handwriting. "He believed me." I don't know if that breaks my heart or saves it. The door opened. Daniel stepped out, his face unreadable. "They want you back in," he said. Ryan walked back into the room and stood at the head of the table he might never sit at again. Eleanor Pierce folded her hands. "Ryan," she said, "the board has reached a decision. But before we share it, Dr. Carter asked for a moment alone with you. The rest of us will step out." She paused. "I suggest you use it well." One by one they filed out, until it was only the two of them in the enormous boardroom, the length of the long table between them, exactly as it had been when she walked in. For a long moment neither of them spoke. "You didn't have to do it this way," Ryan finally said. "You could have called. You could have just told me that first night who you really were. We could have what?" Grace said. "Been equals Ryan the day you found out I had money. Do you honestly believe you would have looked at me as a partner? Or would you have looked at me as a threat? You needed me to be beneath you. It was the only way you knew how to love anyone. I didn't hide who I was to trick you. I hid it because somewhere deep down, even on the first day, I already knew the answer. I just wasn't brave enough to admit it for 5 years." Ryan had no defense. There was none. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it more than he had ever meant anything. "For all of it. For the affair, for the things I said, for never asking, for the blanket. God grace the blanket. I didn't even know it was your mother's. I never asked. I never asked you anything." Something flickered in Grace's eyes, then the smallest crack in her composure, the first real emotion she had shown. "No," she said softly. "You didn't." "Tell me how to fix it," Ryan said, and he was almost begging now. "Tell me what to do. I'll step down. I'll give you the company. I'll give you everything. Just tell me there's a way back." Grace stood. She picked up her slim folder, and she walked the length of the long table until she stood beside him, closer than they had been since that stormy night. "There's no way back, Ryan," she said. "But there might be a way forward. Not for us. That door closed the night you told me to kneel. But for this company, for the people who work here, for the woman I'm trying to be now instead of the woman I let you make me into." She looked at him, and the pity in her eyes had softened into something almost like sorrow. "The board's keeping you, by the way, as an advisor. Not as CEO. I asked them to. Ryan stared at her. You asked them to keep me? I asked them not to throw you in the street, Grace said. Because unlike you, I know what it's like to be told you're nothing. I would never do that to another person, not even to you. She moved toward the door. Take the advisor seat. Learn something. Become a man worth the second chance you don't deserve. That's the only mercy I have left to give you. She put her hand on the door. Grace, Ryan said. His voice broke on her name. Did you ever love me? Was any of it real? She stopped. She did not turn around. All of it was real, she said quietly. That's what made it the worst 5 years of my life. I loved you completely, Ryan. I loved a man who didn't exist, because the real one never bothered to show me who he was either. We were both strangers. The difference is, I knew it and I stayed anyway hoping. You didn't even know enough to hope. And then she opened the door and walked out, and the board filed back in to deliver a verdict Ryan already knew, and the empire he had built passed quietly out of his hands, and the only thing he was left holding was the truth he had spent 5 years too proud to see. For 3 months, Ryan Montgomery did the hardest thing he had ever done in his life. He stayed. He took the advisor's seat. He sat at the end of the long table where Grace had sat that first morning, and he watched another man run the company he had built. It was humiliating. Every instinct in him screamed to quit, to walk away with what was left of his pride, to go somewhere no one knew his name. But every time he thought about leaving, he heard her voice. Become a man worth the second chance you don't deserve. And so he stayed. And he did something he had never done in 15 years of leadership. He listened. Grace did not come to the office often. She ran her own company from Chicago, now leading a team of researchers that the technology press had started calling the most talented assembled in a generation. But her presence was everywhere in Montgomery Technologies. Her propulsion system, licensed under careful terms, had already brought in 2 major contracts the company had lost years ago. Her standards had quietly reshaped how the engineers worked. The whole building moved differently now, with a kind of urgency and pride Ryan had not felt in the place for a very long time. And the worst part, the part that ate at him in the quiet hours, was that it was better. The company was healthier without him at the top than it had ever been with him. She had been right about everything. He started reading. Late at night, alone in the mansion that still felt like a museum, he read the engineering texts from the bookshelf he had always assumed were decorative. He did not understand most of it, but he kept trying because for the first time he wanted to understand the world she lived in. He wanted to know what he had been blind to. One evening about 2 months in, Daniel Reyes found him at the small desk in the office surrounded by Grace's old notebooks, copies he had made before returning the originals. You know she'd find that strange, Daniel said. You studying propulsion theory at midnight. I find it strange, Ryan admitted. I don't understand a word of it. But she sat at a desk like this for 6 years, and I never once asked what she was building. The least I can do now is try. Daniel sat down across from him. He had become over these months something Ryan had never had before, a friend who told him the truth. Can I say something to you, Ryan, as someone who's known you a long time? You've earned that, Ryan said. You're a different man than you were 6 months ago, Daniel said. I don't know if you can see it, but the rest of us can. You used to walk in here like the building owed you something. Now you walk in like you're grateful to still have a seat at the table. He paused. She did that. Whatever else happened, she made you into someone worth being around. Ryan was quiet for a long moment. I'd trade all of it, he said finally. Everything I've learned. To have one chance to go back to that night and ask her one question. Just one. Who are you really? That's all I had to say. 5 years and I never asked her once. Then maybe, Daniel said carefully, you should tell her that. The opportunity came sooner than he expected. 3 weeks later, the company announced a major joint event in Chicago, a public unveiling of the first commercial application of the propulsion system. Both companies would be there, the press would be there, and Grace would be there as the inventor, as the partner, as the woman who had saved them all. Ryan was invited as an advisor. He almost did not go. He sat with the invitation in his hand for 2 days. Then he remembered the notebooks and the line that had broken him, and he booked a flight to Chicago. He told himself he was going for the company. He knew that was a lie. He was going to see her. The event was enormous. Hundreds of people, cameras everywhere, the kind of spectacle that announced a new era for an entire industry. Ryan stood at the back in a quiet corner watching Grace work the room. She was magnificent. Not in the way of someone performing, but in the way of someone who had finally completely become herself. Engineers crowded around her with questions. Reporters hung on her words. Young women, he noticed, watched her with a particular light in their eyes, the light of people who had just discovered that someone like them could stand at the center of a room like this. He waited until the crowds thinned, until the cameras had moved on, and then when she was finally alone for a moment near a window overlooking the city, he approached her. "Grace." She turned, and for just a second something crossed her face that was not quite surprise and not quite displeasure. Then it smoothed into the calm he had come to know. "Ryan," she said, "I wondered if you'd come." "I almost didn't," he admitted. "I didn't think I had the right. And yet here you are. Here I am." He looked at her, really looked at her, the way he should have looked at her every day for 5 years. "You did it," he said quietly. "All of it. Everything you said you'd do that night you've done. The technology, the company, all of it. I've spent 3 months watching it happen up close, and I still can't fully believe it." "You can't believe it because you spent 5 years believing I was incapable of it," Grace said. There was no cruelty in it, just the truth stated plainly. "That's not a wound, Ryan. It's just a fact. I made peace with it a long time ago." "I read your notebooks," Ryan said. Grace went still. "I made copies before I gave the originals back," he said. "I've been studying them. I don't understand most of it, but I understand the dates. You were working on this before we met, the whole time we were married, at that little desk in the guest room." His voice tightened. "And I found something, a note you wrote in the margins. About a day I asked you what you did all day, and you told me nothing important, and I believed you." Grace's composure cracked just slightly. She looked away toward the window. "You wrote, 'I don't know if that breaks my heart or saves it,'" Ryan said. "I've thought about that line every single day since I read it. Which was it, Grace, in the end? Did it break your heart, or did it save it?" For a long moment she did not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was lower than he had ever heard it. "Both," she said. "It broke my heart that the man I loved could look at me every day and accept nothing important as the answer. That he never once was curious enough to push past it. But it saved me too, because every time you accepted that lie, it reminded me that I was keeping the most important part of myself alive in a place you would never look. You couldn't take it from me, Ryan, because you didn't even know it was there. That little desk was the only place in our marriage where I got to be who I actually am." She turned back to him. "So yes, both. It broke me and it saved me. That was our whole marriage, really, wasn't it?" Ryan felt the words land like stones. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know it doesn't fix anything. I know it's 5 years too late. But I am. I'm sorry for all of it. And I'm not saying it to win you back. I know that's gone. I'm saying it because you deserve to hear it from me finally without any reason behind it, except that it's true." Grace studied him for a long moment, and then she did something that surprised them both. She sat down on the bench by the window and she gestured for him to sit beside her. Not close, but beside her. "I believe you," she said. "I can see it. You're different. I've heard it from Daniel, from the board, from people who have no reason to flatter you. The man who told me to kneel that night couldn't sit where you're sitting and say what you just said. So I believe you've changed." Ryan's heart leapt foolishly, and she saw it, and she gently put it to rest. "But changing doesn't earn you a way back to me," she said. "I need you to understand that because I think part of you came here hoping it might. A person can become better and still not be owed the thing they lost. You hurt me in a way that doesn't heal back into what it was, no matter how sorry you are. Your growth is good. I'm glad of it. It just isn't mine to be rewarded with. Do you understand the difference?" Ryan was quiet. Then he nodded slowly. "I think I do," he said. "For the first time, I think I do." "Then we understand each other," Grace said, and there was something almost warm in it. "Finally, after all this time." They sat in silence for a while, watching the city lights come on below them. And it was Ryan, surprisingly, who broke it. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "And you can tell me it's none of my business." "Go ahead." "Why did you keep me on as an advisor? You had every reason to throw me out into the street with nothing. You could have done to me exactly what I told you I would do to you. Why didn't you?" Grace was quiet for a long moment. "Do you remember what you said to me that night?" she asked. "You said I'd have nothing without you, that I was a waitress with a sad story and a dead mother, that you lifted me out of nothing." She turned to look at him. I spent 5 years carrying those words around, and I made a decision somewhere in there that whatever else happened, I was never going to become someone who said things like that to another human being, not even to the person who said them to me, especially not to him. She looked back out at the city. If I'd thrown you out with nothing, Ryan, I'd have proven you right. I'd have become you, and I would rather lose everything than become the kind of person who tells someone they're worthless. My mother raised me better than that, so I kept you on. Not for you, for her, for me, for the person I promised myself I'd be. And there it was, the deepest truth of who Grace Carter was, the thing that separated her from the man beside her in a way that no amount of money or genius ever could. She had been handed every reason in the world to become cruel, and she had refused. Her dignity was not a weapon she had been saving. It was simply who she was. Ryan felt tears in his eyes and did not bother to hide them. "Your mother," he said. "I never asked about her either. Tell me about her, please. I know it's too late, but I want to know about the woman who made you, if you'll tell me." And Grace, after a moment, did. She told him about Eleanor, about the library books at the kitchen table until midnight, about a woman who cleaned houses and read physics for pleasure, and told her daughter every single day that the mind was the one thing no one could ever take from her. She told him about the hospital and the treatments and the choice she had made to walk away from a brilliant career to sit at her mother's bedside. She told him about the blanket, stitched by hand by a dying woman who wanted to leave her daughter something warm to hold. And Ryan listened, truly listened, and with every word he understood more completely the magnitude of what he had thrown away. "That blanket," he said when she had finished, his voice barely a whisper. "The one I threw at your feet, the one I put on another woman's shoulders. That was the last thing your mother ever made you." "Yes," Grace said simply. Ryan put his head in his hands. "I'll never forgive myself for that," he said. "Of everything I did, that's the one I'll carry to my grave." "Good," Grace said. It was not unkind, it was honest. "You should carry it, not as punishment, as a reminder. The blanket isn't about you, Ryan. It never was. But what you did with it should teach you something about who you don't want to be anymore. Let it." She stood. "I have to go. There are people waiting for me." Ryan stood too. "Grace," he said, "thank you for seeing me even now, for more than I deserved. You could have left me in the dark forever, and you'd have been right to. Instead, you showed me the truth even when it cost you something to do it." Grace looked at him one last time, and the pity that had been in her eyes since that stormy night was finally completely gone. In its place was something else. Not love. That was over. But a kind of clean, peaceful acceptance, the look of a woman who had closed a chapter so completely that it no longer had any power to hurt her. "Goodbye, Ryan," she said. "Build something good with the time you have left. Be someone your name can be proud of. That's all I ever wanted for you, even when I was angry, even when you didn't deserve it." And then she walked away into the bright center of the room, back to the people who saw her clearly, back to the future she had built with her own hands. And Ryan Montgomery stood by the window and watched her go for the second and final time. But this time, he was not laughing the way he had that stormy night when he believed a poor woman had nowhere to go. This time he understood exactly where she was going, and exactly who she was, and exactly what he had lost. And though it broke him to watch her disappear into that crowd, there was something underneath the grief that he had never felt before in his entire life. I was glad. Glad that she had become everything she was always meant to be. Glad that the world finally saw her. Glad, even through his own ruin, that the most extraordinary person he had ever known was free. It was, he realized, the first truly unselfish feeling he had ever had, and he owed even that to her. The months that followed turned Grace Carter from a story the industry was talking about into a force the industry could not function without. Her company in Chicago grew faster than anyone had predicted. The clean propulsion system that had stunned the world at that first press conference was only the beginning. Her team developed application after application, each one solving problems that engineers had called impossible for decades. Contracts poured in. The technology press, which had once never heard her name, now could not stop saying it. She was on magazine covers. She was the keynote speaker at conferences, where the most respected minds in the field came specifically to hear her talk. And everywhere she went, she carried herself with the same quiet steadiness she had carried out into the rain that stormy night, the steadiness of a woman who no longer needed anyone's permission to take up space in the world. But the thing Grace was proudest of was not the contracts or the covers. It was the jobs. Her company created thousands of them. Good jobs in cities that needed them building a future instead of just chasing a profit. She insisted on it. When her advisors told her she could manufacture cheaper overseas, she told them no, that she had spent 3 years working ordinary jobs to pay her mother's medical bills, and she knew exactly what a good job meant to a family that was struggling. She built her factories in the places that had been forgotten. She paid wages that let people breathe. And when reporters asked her why, when it would have been so much more profitable to do otherwise, she always gave the same answer. "Because I remember being the person who needed the job," she would say. "I never want to forget her. She's the reason for all of this." It was during one of those interviews nearly a year after she had walked out of Ryan's mansion that something happened that Grace had not expected. The reporter, a thoughtful young woman, asked her a question that no one had asked before. "Dr. Carter, you've inspired a generation of young women in engineering. They write about you online. They cite you as the reason they didn't give up. Did you ever imagine back when you were working in that cafe that you'd become someone girls look up to?" And Grace, for the first time in any interview, did not have a smooth answer ready. She thought about it for a long moment, and then she said something that would be quoted for years afterward. "When I was working in that cafe," she said slowly, "a man told me I was nothing, that I'd have nothing and be nothing without him, and for a while in the quietest part of me I almost believed him. So if there's a girl out there right now who has someone in her life telling her what she'll never be, I want her to hear this from me. The people who tell you that you're nothing are telling you about the size of their own imagination, not the size of your worth. Don't you dare let someone else's small mind become the ceiling on your big life. I almost did. Don't make my mistake." The clip went around the world. It was watched tens of millions of times. And in a quiet office at Montgomery Technologies, an advisor named Ryan watched it on his phone alone, and he understood that she was talking about him, and he was not angry, and he was not ashamed. He was simply glad that the worst words he had ever spoken had been transformed in her hands into something that would help people for the rest of their lives. Even his cruelty, she had found a way to turn into something good. That was who she was. That was who she had always been while he was too blind to see it. Ryan, for his part, kept the promise he had made to himself. He stayed in the advisor's seat, and he made himself useful. He mentored younger executives, and to everyone's surprise, he was good at it, perhaps because he had finally learned the hard way every mistake a leader could make. The company thrived. He never tried to climb back to the top. He had learned at last the difference between a man who deserves power and a man who simply craves it, and he had made his peace with being the former by no longer being the latter. He never remarried. People assumed he was pining, but it was not quite that. It was that Grace had shown him a standard of what a person could be, and he could not bring himself to settle for anything that fell short of it, including in himself. He spent his evenings reading her old notebooks, the copies he had kept, slowly teaching himself enough to finally understand a fraction of the mind he had lived beside and never bothered to know. It became a kind of devotion, not to Grace exactly, to the lesson she had taught him at such a terrible price. Pay attention, see people, ask the question. Never ever assume you know who is standing beside you. Victoria Hayes, for those who wondered, faded back into the world she had come from. Her interview about the cold billionaire had earned her a few weeks of attention, and then nothing. She had built her life on being agreeable to powerful men, and when the power moved on, so did she, chasing the next warm seat to curl up in. There was no grand reckoning for her. There rarely is for people like that. They simply drift looking for the next thing to attach themselves to, never understanding that the women they envy have something they will never possess, which is a self that exists whether anyone is looking or not. Grace and Ryan never returned to the marriage. Some chapters are meant to end, and theirs had ended completely the night he told her to kneel. But something else grew in the place where the marriage had been. Not love. Something quieter, and in its own way more remarkable. A respect. They saw each other a handful of times over the years that followed, always at industry events, always briefly. And every time Ryan treated her with a deference that was almost reverence, and Grace treated him with a warmth that surprised everyone who knew their history. They had become impossibly two people who understood each other. He had finally become a man worth a conversation, and she had become large enough in herself to have one without being diminished by it. At one such event years later, a young engineer who did not know their history saw them speaking quietly in a corner and asked a colleague who the man was that Dr. Carter seemed to know so well. "That's Ryan Montgomery," the colleague said. "He used to run the company that licenses her propulsion tech. Word is they were married once a long time ago." "Married?" the young engineer said, astonished. "What happened?" The colleague shrugged. "Nobody really knows the whole story, but look at them. Whatever it was, they came out the other side as something. Friends, I guess, or something like it." And that was true in a way, but it was not the whole truth. The whole truth was something only Grace and Ryan knew, and it was this. He had thrown her away believing she was nothing, and in doing so, he had set free the most extraordinary woman the industry would ever know. And she had risen so completely, so far beyond him, that she could afford to look back down at the man who had tried to crush her, and instead of crushing him in return, she had reached down and pulled him up into being someone better. That was her final victory, not the company, not the money, not the fame. It was that she had refused at every turn to let his smallness make her small. She had answered cruelty with dignity, and dignity had won. There is a moment Grace returned to often in the quiet years that followed when her work was done for the day and the office had gone still. She would think about that stormy night, about standing in the living room of a mansion that was never really hers, holding her dead mother's blanket, watching the man she had loved laugh at her and tell her she had nowhere to go. And she remembered the strange calm that had come over her in that moment. Not despair, calm, because in that instant she had finally understood something her mother had spent a lifetime trying to teach her. They can take the house, they can take the money, they can take the name, but what you build up here, baby, what you carry in your own mind and your own heart, that is yours forever, and no one can ever take it from you. Ryan had taken nothing from Grace that night. He had only revealed to her at last that she already had everything she needed. The degrees were already earned. The patents were already filed. The fortune was already hers. The genius was already inside her. All that stormy night did was give her permission to stop hiding it. He thought he was throwing her into the rain with nothing. In truth, he was opening the door to a future that had been standing ready and waiting for her all along, while she lingered in a marriage out of a love that deserved better, hoping a man would someday see her until she finally understood that the only person who needed to see her clearly was herself. So let this be the truth that stays with you long after the story ends. Never underestimate the quiet ones. The person sitting silently beside you asking for nothing, demanding no attention, may be carrying a strength and a brilliance you cannot begin to imagine. The strongest people in this world are almost never the loudest. They are the ones who never felt the need to prove themselves to anyone because they had already proven everything they needed to prove to the only person who mattered. Themselves. A person's worth is not measured by their bank account or their job or the clothes they wear or the house they live in. It is measured by their character, their integrity, and their refusal to become cruel, even when cruelty would be so easy. Grace Carter could have destroyed Ryan Montgomery. She had every right and every means to do it. And the fact that she chose not to, the fact that she chose dignity over revenge at every single turn, is precisely why she became someone the world looked up to, and he became someone the world forgot until she lifted him back up. Respect the people who stand beside you. Ask them who they are. Ask them about their dreams. Ask them what they are building at that quiet little desk in the dark. Do it now while they are still beside you, before life teaches you their value, the hard way, the way it taught Ryan Montgomery, who spent 5 years next to an extraordinary woman and learned what she was worth only after she was gone. One rainy night, a billionaire looked at the woman he had spent 5 years failing to see, and he believed she had nowhere in the world to go. He was wrong. She was not walking away from a life. She was walking toward the one that had been waiting for her all along. And she walked into it with her head held high, carrying nothing but a single bag and her mother's blanket and a mind no one could ever touch, and she never once looked back, because everything she needed she had carried with her all along. That is the story of Grace Carter. Remember it, and remember this above all: dignity will always outlast revenge. Intelligence belongs to no social class, and love cannot survive where respect does not live. Grace knew all of this the night she walked into the rain, and by the end, so did the whole world.